The cold wind howled across the icy ground of HFY. Snowflakes. Sharp-leg needles cut across Vera's face as she carried her daughter in her arms. Ralmi was too quiet, her small alien body wrapped in torn cloth. Her breath shallow and slow. Vera's feet dragged through the snow. Her legs shaking with every step. She reached the 12th door that night. Her fingers bleeding and frostbitten from knocking again and again. The door was big, metal, with lights flashing on top a shelter. Just like the others, Vera knocked. 3 times, her knuckles raw, her voice already weak from crying. "Please," she whispered. "My daughter is sick. We need warmth. Just a night." A camera moved above the door, scanning her face, her species, her torn clothes. A voice came. Through the speaker, cold and sharp, "No aliens allowed, move on." Then, with a loud buzz, the door slid shut without ever opening. Vera stood there, silent for a second, her heart sinking. Ralmi let out a soft cough, her tiny blue lips trembling. Vera pulled her closer and turned. Walking away from the 12th rejection, tears froze. On her cheeks before they could even fall, she looked at the sky, gray and dead, wondering if she would even survive to find the next door. Earlier that day, she had started with hope. The first shelter had looked so friendly, warm lights, flowers outside, music playing. But when they saw her alien features, her gray skin, her sharp ears, they slammed the door. No room? They had lied. Even though she saw empty beds behind them, 2nd door, 3rd door, 4th, all the same. Some rude, some scared, all refusing. At the 6th door, someone had thrown a bottle at her, calling her a parasite. By the 10th, she had stopped speaking, only knocking and waiting, praying someone would say yes, but no one did. And now, only one more shelter stood on her path. The last one, the 13th. She didn't even want to try anymore, but Ralmi whimpered, and Vera knew she couldn't stop. She wrapped her daughter tighter, kissed her cold forehead, and whispered, "One more little star. One more." The 13th shelter was farther than the others, a small old station at the edge of the colony zone. No lights, no music, just a door and a flickering camera above it. Vera walked up slowly, her legs nearly giving out. She stood in front of the door, barely able to lift her arm, and knocked. 3 weak taps, then nothing. Her knees bent, and she collapsed in front of it, shielding Ralmi with her own body. She didn't cry anymore. She had no tears left. The door creaked, then opened a few inches. Just enough for someone to look out. It was a man, tall, rough beard, scars on his face, and eyes that had seen too much. He was human, and he just stared. For a long second, not speaking, Vera forced out the words, "Please, show mercy. She's sick. She'll die." Her voice cracked at the end. Her lips blue from the cold. The man didn't move, just looked down at the child in her arms. Ralmi coughed again, her hand twitching weakly. For a moment, Vera thought he would slam the door like the others, but instead, he opened it wider and stepped aside. "Come in," he said. Not kindly, not harshly, just simply, like it was the only right thing to do. Vera couldn't believe it. She blinked, unsure if she had heard. "Right now," he added, "before you both freeze." With shaking arms, she stood up, holding Ralmi close, and stepped inside. Warmth hit her skin like a soft wave, and the smell of soup filled her nose. The man shut the door behind them, locked it, and walked ahead. Vera followed slowly, her eyes still wide with fear and disbelief. He pointed to a soft chair near a heater. "Sit, I'll get a blanket." Vera sat down, clutching her daughter close. The man returned with a thick thermal blanket and wrapped them both in it. Ralmi moved slightly, her breathing deeper now, her skin less cold. Vera looked up. "Thank you," she whispered, tears welling again, but this time, not from pain. The man nodded, then said, "Name's Grant Vera." She answered softly, and she's Ralmi. Grant crouched beside them, checking the child's face carefully. She's got a fever, he said, standing to grab a medkit. Don't worry. I've seen worse. That night, as Vera watched Ralmi sleep peacefully for the first time. In days, she looked at the 13th door, now closed and safe behind them. 12 doors had shown cruelty, but the 13th? It had shown a human heart. Asterisk, the small shelter was quiet, except for the sound of a heater humming in the corner. Vera sat on the floor beside a warm vent, holding Ralmi close to her chest. Her daughter was still asleep, her fever not gone yet. But her breath was steady. Vera didn't speak, afraid that even a whisper might break the peace. Across the room, Grant moved slowly, stirring something in a pot on an old cooking unit. The smell of soup filled the air, simple, but warm and real. It had been days since Vera had tasted anything that wasn't bitter snow or broken hope. Grant didn't ask questions. Not yet. He placed a cup of soup in front of her and said, "Eat before it cools." Vera looked at the bowl, then up at him. Unsure if it was truly meant for her, he nodded and turned back to the stove without saying more. She picked up the spoon with shaking hands and took a small sip. The warmth spread through her body like light after long darkness. She closed her eyes, tears gathering again, not from pain, but from relief. For the first time in many days, she felt like maybe she wouldn't die in the cold. After a while, Grant sat down across from her, resting his back against the wall. He held a small cup of tea, staring into it like it carried old memories. Vera whispered, "Thank you." But he didn't look up. He just said, "No one should freeze to death with a child in their arms." His voice was flat, not cruel, not kind. Just tired. Vera nodded, unsure what to say. So much had happened. In such little time, her heart still raced, even in safety. After a long pause, Grant spoke again. "Where's the father?" Vera looked down at her daughter, then away. "Killed last winter. By soldiers looking for labor slaves." Grant's jaw tightened, but he said nothing. She continued, voice low. "We ran, and we've been running ever since." Grant's eyes met hers, and something in them softened. "Just a little. I used to be a soldier," he said. "But not the kind that hurt families." Vera said nothing, but her eyes watched him closely. She didn't see cruelty in him, only pain. Deep and old, he pointed to an old picture frame on the shelf, a smiling human girl with brown eyes and curly hair. Maybe 8 years old. "That was my daughter," Grant said. "Died from infection while we waited for medicine that never came." Vera's chest tightened. "I'm sorry," she whispered. "She would have been around your daughter's age now," he added, looking at Ralmi. They both sat in silence. The kind of silence that understands grief without needing words. As the fire crackled in the heater, Vera spoke. "The shelters, they all rejected me. 12 doors," she said slowly. 12 faces that looked at us and said no. Grant nodded once, his hands clenched around the cup. "People forget what mercy looks like," he said, "when fear eats their minds." "Fear of what?" she asked, her voice trembling. "Fear of difference, fear of weakness, fear that helping you makes them a target too." Vera looked at the scars on his arms, old burns and cuts. "You're not afraid?" she asked, not as a challenge, but as a question. "I am," he said. "But fear isn't supposed to stop us from being human." Later that night, Ralmi stirred and woke with a soft cry. Vera quickly held her, feeding her warm broth slowly. From the spoon, the girl smiled faintly, and for the first time in weeks, she whispered, "Mama." Vera choked on her breath and hugged her tight. Grant stood nearby, watching with careful eyes. Then walked over and gently covered them both with another blanket. "Let her sleep here tonight, near the heater," he said, pointing to a softer spot by the wall. Vera moved carefully. Placing Ralmi down and tucking her in, she sat beside her, brushing her daughter's hair gently with her fingers. Grant turned to leave, but paused at the doorway. "You can stay until she's well," he said. "No one will bother you here." "Why?" Vera asked softly, still not believing this man's kindness. He looked back, and for the first time, his voice cracked a little. "Because someone should have helped my daughter." Then he walked away, leaving her alone with the warmth, the safety, and a new kind of Aquan that hoped, one that trusted. Vera lay beside her daughter, eyes wide open in the darkness. She had seen so much hate, so much fear, but in this small, broken shelter. She had also seen fire, not the kind that destroys, but the kind that warms, protects, and maybe, just maybe, heals. The next morning, the sky outside was still gray and full of snow. Inside the small shelter, it was quiet, but not peaceful. Ralmi's breathing had changed during the night. Now it was fast and shallow. Vera pressed a hand to her daughter's forehead, her heart pounding. It was burning hot, hotter than before. "No, no, no," she whispered, brushing Ralmi's damp hair. She had hoped they were past the worst, but the fever had returned. Stronger than ever, Grant was already awake. Sitting by the window with a metal cup of dark liquid, he turned at the sound of Vera's panicked breathing. "What's wrong?" he asked, standing up fast. "Her fever," Vera said, voice shaking. "It's worse. Her body is too hot, and her hands are cold." Grant didn't waste a second. He crossed the room and touched Ralmi's forehead. "Too high," he muttered. "She might seize if this keeps up." Vera held her daughter close, tears forming in her eyes. "Please help her. I don't know what to do." Grant rushed to a storage box near the back wall and opened it. Inside were old military supplies, bandages, syringes, water packs, and some faded medicine tubes. He pulled out a vial of bioserum, one not designed for aliens, but for humans. "With fever, it's not made for her biology," he said, hesitating, "but it might work, or it might kill her." Vera asked, her voice a whisper of fear. Grant nodded slowly. "It's a risk, but without it, the fever could do worse." Vera looked down at Ralmi, who was now barely moving, her lips dry and eyes closed tight. "Do it," she said. "Please, Grant." Filled a syringe and knelt beside the child. He looked into Vera's eyes one more time for permission. She nodded, holding her daughter's small hand tightly. The needle slid into Ralmi's arm, and Grant slowly pressed the serum in. Then they waited. Minutes felt like hours as Ralmi's body remained still. Vera rocked her gently, whispering songs from their home world, her voice cracking. Grant sat beside them in silence, his hands clenched, his eyes never leaving the child's face. 10 minutes passed, still nothing. Vera leaned her head against Ralmi's, whispering, "Please wake up, please." Grant turned away, his shoulders stiff. He had seen death before, too many times, and he couldn't watch it happen again. He stood, ready to leave the room. When he heard a small, dry cough, he turned fast. Just in time to see Ralmi's fingers twitch. Her head shift slightly. She moved. Vera cried, her voice breaking. "She's moving." Ralmi opened her eyes slowly, unfocused. At first, then clearer. "Mama," she whispered, so soft it could barely be heard. Vera burst into tears, holding her daughter tight, crying into her little neck. Grant knelt again, checking her pulse, her breathing, her skin. "She's stabilizing," he said, and his voice had a trace of something near relief. Maybe even hope. Vera turned and hugged him without thinking. Grant froze at first, not used to touch, not after so many years alone. But then, slowly, he placed a hand on her back, awkward but gentle. She pulled away after a moment, wiping her eyes. "I don't know how to thank you," she said softly. "Don't," he replied, to just help her get strong again. That day, Vera sat by Ralmi's side, feeding her small spoons of soup and cooling her forehead with cloth. Grant brought water, cleaned the small room, and checked the temperature every hour. He didn't smile, but he didn't frown either. Vera watched him, wondering what kind of man would do all this for strangers, not for glory, not for reward, but simply because it was right. That night, Grant sat by the heater again, working on a broken drone. Vera sat across from him, her daughter asleep beside her. "Were you always like this?" she asked, her voice soft. "Like what?" He replied, not looking up, "Kind." But hiding it behind silence, he chuckled once, a dry sound. "No? I used to talk too much, used to care too loudly. What changed?" She asked. "War," he said, "and losing someone I couldn't save." Vera didn't speak after that, but she understood. They both carried pain, different stories. Same weight, but now, sitting in this small shelter, they weren't alone. In it, not anymore. Ralmi's fever broke by morning, her cheeks no longer pale, her eyes brighter. She sat up weakly and asked for more soup. Vera cried again, this time with laughter mixed in. Grant smiled too, just a little, and handed her the spoon himself. That moment, the warmth, the life, the quiet understanding was more powerful than any rescue ship, because sometimes all it takes is one person, one scarred soldier, to bring someone back from the edge. The days grew quieter after Ralmi's fever broke, her strength returned slowly, and she even began to smile again. She would sit by the heater, building small shapes from broken parts Grant gave her. Vera cooked simple meals and kept the shelter tidy for the first time in many weeks. There was peace, small, fragile, but real, but peace never lasts long on Xerix 5. Not for people like them. Especially not for aliens hiding in human territory. 1. Afternoon, as Vera washed clothes in a metal basin near the rear of the shelter, Grant stood outside, fixing a signal booster on the roof. The cold was less sharp that day, and the sun tried to peek through the clouds. Ralmi played nearby, laughing softly as she chased a small service drone. That was when the knock came, not soft like Vera's had been, but sharp, loud, and demanding. 3 fists to the metal door, followed by a voice. "Galactic Patrol, open up." Grant froze on the roof, his hand still holding a wrench. Vera looked up from the basin, her heart jumping into her throat. Ralmi stopped playing and ran toward her mother, sensing something was wrong inside the shelter. The door vibrated again from another heavy knock. "Grant Mason, this is Patrol Unit 7. We are conducting a search." Grant climbed down fast. Eyes sharp, voice steady. "Stay inside," he told Vera. She nodded, pulling Ralmi into the shelter and locking the back door. Her hands trembled as she grabbed a kitchen knife. Not much, but something. Grant opened the front door partway, enough to show his face, but block the view inside. 2 armored officers stood there, their helmets reflecting the gray sky. "Just me here," Grant said calmly. "No need to make a mess. Routine inspection," one of them said, stepping forward. Grant didn't move. Instead, he showed a metal badge from under his coat hold. But still valid. Special Forces, Class 5 discharge. "This is private land under my clearance." The officer paused, checking the badge with a scanner. His partner looked toward the shelter, suspicious. "You've been off-grid," the officer said, "and we received reports of alien movement in this sector." Grant didn't blink. "I don't report to you, and I haven't seen anyone besides snow rabbits." The officers exchanged glances, unsure whether to push or leave after a few tense seconds. The scanner beeped green, confirming Grant's ID. "Fine," the lead officer said. "We'll check the next sector." Grant stepped out fully and closed the door behind him, standing tall. "Try the southern hills," he said coldly. "They like the caves." The officers turned without another word, their boots crunching the snow as they walked away. Grant watched until they were out of sight. then went back inside and locked the door tight. Inside, Vera stood still, holding the knife in one hand and Romy in the other. "They're gone," Grant said softly. "But they'll be back." Vera put the knife down, her breath unsteady. "How did they know?" "They didn't," Grant said. "They're just guessing, looking for anyone different." Romy sat on the floor, her eyes wide, still too young to understand fully, but smart enough to feel fear. Vera picked her up and held her close, whispering. Comfort in her ear. "They'll find out one day," she said, "won't they?" Grant nodded. "That's why we need to prepare." He walked to a storage crate and opened it, pulling out a plasma rifle, heavy, old but clean and loaded. Vera stared at it. "Nervous? You really think it'll come to that?" "It always does," Grant replied. "When you protect someone, the system says doesn't belong." Vera stepped closer, her voice low. "Then teach me." Grant looked at her, surprised. "You want to learn?" "I don't want to be helpless again," she said. "I want to stand beside you, not behind you." He nodded slowly, then handed her the rifle. "Lesson 1, don't aim unless you're ready to shoot." Her fingers curled around the grip, awkward at first, but steady. "I'm ready," she whispered. The next few days became something new. By morning, Vera trained with Grant in the snowy field behind the shelter. She learned to hold, aim, and fire, learned how to set traps and read tracks in the snow. Romy watched from the window, her little hands pressed to the glass. Sometimes she waved, and Vera smiled back, never letting go of the weapon. By night, they told stories by the heater of lost homes, broken worlds, and the dreams still left. It wasn't a perfect life. It was something better than running. They had stopped being strangers. They were becoming something more: survivors, partners, maybe even a family. And, though danger still circled them like wolves in the dark, there was one thing those patrols didn't understand. When you find warmth after the cold, and someone finally shows you mercy, you don't let go without a fight. The shelter felt different now, not just safer, but alive. Where once there was only silence and cold, now there was laughter, footsteps, and the sound of Romy's small voice calling out across the room. She was healing faster than anyone expected, her cheeks no longer pale, her eyes bright like stars. She still coughed sometimes, but each day her body grew stronger. Grant had fixed up a small corner just for her, with blankets, old toys, and a cracked screen that showed gentle star maps. Romy loved it. She called it her sky corner, and would sit there for hours, dreaming. Vera stayed close, but she had started to relax too. She cooked most of the meals now, using whatever food Grant had stored: tinned beans, freeze-dried noodles, old protein packs. Sometimes she made simple alien dishes with roots and herbs she gathered from the nearby forest. Grant tried them with a raised eyebrow, then usually nodded and said, "Not bad." It made her smile. A small one, but real. In the evenings, they sat around the heater, not speaking much, but comfortable. Vera would fix torn clothes or polish old tools, while Grant worked on broken drones and rewired the solar panel system. It was a quiet life, but it was theirs. One afternoon, Grant handed Vera a small device. She turned it over in her hand. Confused, "What is it?" "Personal defense stunner," he said. "Low voltage, non-lethal, easy to carry." Vera looked at him, surprised. "You're giving this to me?" "You're part of this home now," he replied. "I'd rather you be ready if I'm not around." She tucked the device into her coat, her fingers lingering on it. It wasn't just a tool, it was trust. Later that night, while Romy slept peacefully in her corner, Grant sat with Vera near the heater. The fire cast soft orange light on the walls, their shadows dancing quietly. Vera looked at him and asked, "Do you miss your old life?" Grant didn't answer right away. He stared into the flames for a long moment. "Sometimes," he said finally, "but only the parts with my daughter." Vera nodded, her voice gentle. "She must have been brave." She was stronger then. I ever was, he replied. Even when she was sick, she never cried. He looked down at his hands, calloused and scarred. I couldn't save her, he whispered, but maybe I can do something right now. Vera reached across the space between them and touched his hand lightly. He didn't pull away. Maybe we both lost something, she said, but found something new too. Their eyes met, and for the first time, neither of them looked away. There was no need for fancy words, just the silence that understood. The connection that didn't need explaining. The next day, Ralmi followed Grant outside. Bundled in a thick coat and scarf, she held his hand as they walked toward the solar tower. Ouch. She asked 100 questions about the stars, the machines, the old war badges she had seen on his coat. Grant answered every one with patience, even when she asked if he used to be a real hero. I was just a man who survived, he said. Heroes are the ones who make others smile. Ralmi giggled and hugged his arm. Then you're a hero to me. Grant didn't reply, but he picked her up and carried her on his shoulders. Inside the shelter, Vera watched from the window, tears shining in her eyes. Not tears of fear this time, but of something softer, warmer. By the time the sun dipped low behind the frozen hills, Grant had added a new lock to the front door. Just in case, he told Vera, if anyone comes again, we'll be ready. She nodded, then hesitated, and if they try to take us. Grant looked her straight in the eyes, then I'll make sure they never get the chance. His voice wasn't loud, but it carried weight like a promise carved in stone. Vera placed a hand on his chest near the badge of his old unit. Thank you, she whispered, not just for saving us, but for letting us stay that night. Ralmi curled up beside Vera on the floor while Grant worked late into the evening. He was fixing an old communication dish not to call for help, but to scan patrol signals and stay one step ahead. When he was done, he looked over at them. Asleep under the same blanket, he smiled, just a little, then turned off the lights and sat quietly in the dark. Listening to their breathing, he had lived alone for so long that he forgot what comfort sounded like. But now he remembered, in the quiet space between the stars and the snow. Something had begun to grow, not just survival, but something deeper. A bond built from broken pieces, a family that had no name but meant everything. They were not blood, not from the same world, but they were together, and in a world full of doors that had closed, this one had opened, and behind it was a new kind of home. Asterisk, the snow was falling again, soft and quiet like dust from the sky inside the shelter. Vera was brushing Ralmi's hair while the child hummed to herself. Grant stood by the window watching the tree line. His face looked calm, but his hand stayed near the plasma rifle hanging on the wall. He had been feeling something strange all morning, a silence too deep, a stillness too sharp. And when you've lived through war, you learn to listen to what isn't being said. The peace had lasted longer than he expected, and that made him nervous. Just after noon, the scanner beeped. Grant looked down, saw the blip a transport ship, unmarked, low-flight pattern, circling nearby. Vera, he said, his voice low, hide, Ralmi. She froze for a second, then nodded, scooping her daughter into her arms and disappearing. Into the storage room, Grant grabbed the rifle and stepped outside. The snow crunching under his boots, the sky rumbled, and the ship came into view, landing far too close for it to be a mistake. From the side door, 2 galactic patrol officers stepped out. But not the usual kind. These ones wore black armor and carried stun cannons, the retrieval unit. Grant stood firm in front of his shelter, the rifle in his arms, not aimed, but ready. One officer stepped forward and spoke with a flat tone. We're here under Order 1, 2X. Retrieval of an alien child from unregistered human care. Grant didn't move. You're not taking her. She's alien property under Zirich's planetary law, the officer said. Foundlings must be returned to the system or processed. "She's not property," Grant snapped. "She's a child, and she's under my protection." The second officer raised his scanner, aiming it toward the house. "Stand down, civilian." The first one ordered, "Or face penalty." Grant slowly lifted the rifle, not pointing it at them, but enough to send a message. "This is private land, and I have military clearance to defend it. You're harboring an illegal species." The officer growled, "You're obstructing justice." Grant didn't blink. "Then go get your justice somewhere else." For a moment, no one moved, the snow drifting between them. Then a voice crackled through the patrol's comm, low and "Commanding Unit 7, disengage. That man is under command class protection." Both officers paused, clearly shocked. "Sir?" the first one asked. The voice replied, "You heard me. Back off. We don't need another mess like Terranine." The officers exchanged looks, then lowered their weapons. "We'll report this," one muttered, turning back to the ship. "Do that," Grant said, "and tell your command that she's mine now." They boarded the ship and lifted off, leaving a storm of wind and snow behind. Grant stood there until the ship was just a shadow in the clouds. Then he walked back into the shelter, locking the door tight behind him. Inside, Vera stepped out of hiding. "Roll me in her arms. They wanted her," she said, her voice shaking, just like the others. Grant nodded, placing the rifle back on the wall. "They'll be back," she whispered, "with bigger weapons." "More orders, then we'll be ready," he said. Walking over to check the scanner again, Ralmi looked up at him with wide eyes, her voice soft. "Are they gone, human?" Grant knelt beside her, brushing snow from her hair. "They're gone, little one," he said gently. "And they're not taking you, not while I'm breathing that night." The fire burned brighter than usual. Vera sat close to Grant, her hand resting on his arm. "I thought they would take her," she whispered. "I was ready to beg again." "You don't need to beg anymore," he said. "Not here, not ever." She leaned her head on his shoulder, her voice small. "You could have been hurt, maybe worse. I've already lost everything once," he said. "I'm not letting it happen again." Ralmi lay nearby, fast asleep under a warm blanket. Her little hands curled around a soft cloth doll Vera had made from scraps. Grant watched her, then looked at Vera. "If you want to leave, I won't stop you." Vera looked up, surprised. "Leave?" He nodded. "It'll only get harder from here." She reached out and took his hand, her grip strong. "We're not running anymore," she said. "You saved us, Grant. Now we stay and fight, together." A long silence passed between them, filled only by the sound of wind outside. Then he said, almost too quietly to hear, "I don't know what this is becoming, but I don't want to lose it." "You won't," she promised. "Not unless you push us away." He didn't speak again, just squeezed her hand and closed his eyes. And in that small shelter, in the middle of a cold and merciless world, something unbreakable was forming. Not just protection, not just survival, but love, the quiet kind, the strong kind, the kind that doesn't need to be spoken to be real. Weeks passed and the snow began to melt. The sun peeked through gray skies more often now, and the cold wind was not as sharp. Grant's shelter had changed from a silent, lonely outpost into a home that breathed with life. Ralmi ran through the halls with her tiny feet, laughing as her new drone friend followed her. Vera planted seeds in the greenhouse Grant helped her build, the soil warmed by heat coils he installed under the floor. He had never thought of growing anything again, not food, not hope, not love, but it had all grown anyway. Right in front of him, the scanner stayed quiet for many days. No patrols, no threats. Just space dust and silence. Grant still kept the rifle near the door, but he smiled more often now. He spent his mornings upgrading the perimeter with motion sensors, his afternoons repairing an old crawler vehicle that might one day take them far beyond the ridge. and his evenings were reserved for sitting beside Vera, watching Ralmi fall asleep, and feeling something warm build in his chest. Something he hadn't felt in years, something like peace, one clear night. Grant stepped outside and looked up. The stars were bright, hundreds of them scattered like sparks across a black canvas. Vera joined him, holding 2 cups of tea she made with roots and spice. They stood together, shoulders touching, eyes on the sky. "You ever think of leaving this planet?" she asked softly. Grant took a sip and nodded. "I used to dream of it every night. And now?" she asked, looking sideways at him. "Now I have something worth staying for," he replied without looking away from the stars. Inside, Ralmi had drawn something with broken crayons on a piece of cardboard. She called it the lucky door. It showed a big, strong human standing in front of a door, behind which stood a tired alien mother and a small girl. Grant found it the next morning, smiled, and hung it near the heater. Every time he saw it, he was reminded of that moment, the knock, the begging, the choice he made. One door, one act of mercy, had changed everything. Soon after, an official notice arrived through the old relay station. It was from the Galactic Council. Stamped and signed a declaration that Romi had been granted human sponsorship under Section 9 of Interspecies Care Law. She was no longer illegal, no longer hunted, no longer just an alien child. She was protected. Vera stared at the message for a long time, then slowly sat down, tears streaming silently down her cheeks. Grant handed her a cloth and didn't say a word. Some victories are quiet, but they echo for a lifetime. The next day, Grant built a sign outside the shelter using scrap metal and old wiring. He lit it with solar bulbs and carved 3 names into a Tralmi: Vera and Grant. Not a last name, not a family title, just names together. Side by side, that was enough. The people from the village at the far edge of the territory heard the news. Eventually, a few came to visit, to trade tools, offer help, or just see the child everyone talked about. Most left with softened hearts and fuller hands. They saw not a threat, not a problem, but a family. And the door that once slammed shut on others, it now stayed open wide and welcoming. One afternoon, Ralmi looked up at Grant and asked, "Can I call you Papa?" He froze, heart stumbling, eyes suddenly wet. "You can call me whatever you like, little star," he said, kneeling beside her. She hugged him tightly, and from that moment on, the word stuck. Grant had lost a daughter once, but now he had another, and this time, he would never let her go. Vera grew more comfortable too, walking into the nearby town sometimes with Ralmi. She wore a scarf over her head, not to hide but to stay warm. The people stared less, and some even smiled. They had heard stories about the woman who had been rejected 12 times until a human opened the 13th door. They didn't speak of laws anymore, only of courage, only of kindness. And every evening, before the stars rose, Vera stood by the door, looking out into the quiet. Sometimes she whispered something in her language, soft and full of memory. Grant never asked what she said, but he knew it wasn't sadness anymore. It was a thank you, a promise, maybe a prayer. That door, once cold and forgotten, had opened the universe for them. Not by force, not by war, but by heart. Asterisk.